welcome to the second week in our series called This Is Us, about who we are as the Connection Faith community and who we are trying to be, about our core values that make us what we are, connecting to God through public and private worship, connecting to each other through fellowship and discipleship, and connecting to the world around us through engagement and sharing our stories. We're going to break each one of those 6 things down over the course of this series. Now, I want to point something out to you because you may not have noticed this before. Our logo has 3 points for a reason. Those are our core values: connecting to God, connecting to each other, and connecting to the world around us. So every time you see this logo, I want you to think about what makes us who we are. Well, last week, Pastor Katie led us through an awesome time of reflection about discipleship and what it means to have a relationship with Jesus Christ and how we can grow together as we dive deeper and struggle through what it means to be a follower of Jesus. Now, this week, we're going to look at that second aspect of connecting with each other, and that is fellowship. So here's where I want to start. I want to start with this question: why is fellowship important? Why is gathering together, making connections, building relationships, why is all of that valuable? Why does it matter? Well, there's a section of the Bible that I think answers this question as well as anything I have ever read. And it comes from a section of the Bible called Ecclesiastes. Now, don't let that big word scare you. It's just a section of the Bible written about 3,000 years ago by probably King Solomon. Now, if you don't know who King Solomon was, he was one of the richest kings in the history of the world. One of the richest people in the history of the world, and one of the greatest kings of Israel. And by greatest, I mean he had all the wealth, he built the temple, he did things for the people. But when he got to the end of his life, he started looking back over it and said, you know what? I don't think I pursued the right things. I had all the wealth, I had all the people, I had all the relationships, and he had 700 wives. So he thought he had everything. But at the end of his life, he writes this book of wisdom called Ecclesiastes and essentially says, you know what? It all added up to nothing. Everything is meaningless. He loves that line. Everything is meaningless. And so he writes this book of Ecclesiastes, sharing some wisdom with people because they saw him as a guy who had it all and should have had happiness and fulfillment. But he looks back over his life and says, you know what? I don't. I had riches. I had thousands of people in my court. I had 700 wives and thousands of children. I should have had it all. I should have known what relationships were about. And there's a section in this book, Ecclesiastes, where he talks about what a relationship should look like. And so I think we can learn from a guy who appeared to have it all, but at the end of his life looked back and goes, you know what? I know what really mattered. So he writes this. I want to read this for you. He says, 2 are better than 1, because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up, but pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Also, if 2 lie down together, they will keep warm, but how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, 2 can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. I love this passage. I love this scripture because it talks about what it means to be in a relationship, what it means to be in fellowship with other people, as well as anything I've ever read. And each one of these verses is an example of that, another facet of relationship. And so I want to break this down and answer this question: why is fellowship important first? And the first thing he says, simply, very pragmatically, 2 are better than 1. Now, there are times when having 2 of something is not better than having just 1. 2 broken legs, 2 mortgages, 2 speeding tickets, 2 root canals, and 2 husbands, I'm sure, are not better than having just 1. But when it comes to humanity, when it comes to our existence on this earth, 2 are better than 1 because we were made for community. We were designed for it from the very beginning. When we go back to the start of the Bible, the creation story, all the way back in the book of Genesis, we see God, and he takes this lump of clay and he forms it into the first person, a man named Adam. And he looks down, he breathes life, and the first man comes to life, and he goes, I know I can do better than this. And so he makes a woman. Pause for laughter. No? All right. I love that joke. I don't know why anyone doesn't laugh at that. No, what he says is he makes Adam, breathes life into him, and he says this. He says, it's not right for this human to be alone. And that's when he creates this partnership. Because there's an innate need within all of us to be in relationship, to have community, to fellowship with one another. And if that portion of the Bible didn't do it for you, how about some statistics? Researchers at Brigham Young University, BYU, in 2010 collected data on over 300,000 individuals and discovered this. They reported that those who had successful and healthy relationships actually lived longer than their isolated counterparts. And not just slightly, according to the study, this is fascinating. Surrounding yourself with healthy relationships can add more years to your life than quitting smoking, exercising regularly, or maintaining a healthy body weight. Fascinating. The researchers suggested that when we're in community, when we have relationships, when we do this fellowship thing, we experience less stress. We have people who encourage us to live healthier lives, and therefore we live longer. So community is good for your health. Fellowship actually benefits you physically. Now, if living longer wasn't enough, I think the value of our years, the worth of our years is also important. And I think fellowship helps with that as well. Here's why. We have a loneliness epidemic in our world. Studies have shown that we are lonelier now than we ever have been in the history of our world, which makes no sense because we're more connected to the world around us than we ever have been. But here's the thing. If we have 1,500 Facebook followers and 1,000 Twitter and Instagram followers and 500 likes on our posts, we think that's relationship, but it leaves us wanting because each one of those relationships is about that deep, the depth of a click. We long for deep and meaningful relationships, to know and be known, to love and be loved. And when we think we can get that across the computer screen, we come up wanting, and we're lonely. Timothy Keller, I came across this quote recently. He said this, he says, "To be loved and not known is superficial, but to be known and not loved is our greatest fear." Let me say that again. To be loved and not known is superficial, but to be known and not loved is our greatest fear. So we want to be loved, but we're hesitant to let people know who we really are because we think if we let them know who we really are, then they won't love us anymore. Because if we are then known and they decide they don't love us, it hurts. But to be known and loved is the kind of deep, authentic relationship that God designed us for from the very beginning and what we seek to foster here at the Connection Faith community. So two are better than one because we were made for community. We were made for fellowship. So here's what I want you to do. If you're watching this with a group, you're going to pause it and discuss in your group this next question. If you're watching this by yourself, I want you to go ahead and pause it too and think about this. Let this soak in a little bit and contemplate. Spend some time in reflection and ask God to speak to you in that silence. But think about this question. Take a minute to discuss where you have felt most connected to a community and share that. So, two are better than one because we were made for community. Here's the second thing where he goes next. He just says, here's why. First pragmatic reason, they have a good return for their labor. So the second reason that fellowship and being in a community is so important, we simply get more done together. As individuals, it's hard to accomplish a task, but as a community, as a fellowship, we can accomplish so much. Now, there's an increasing trend in our society regarding people's attitudes towards religion. I'm sure you've heard it a lot, and it's a growing characteristic of people in our society. They say, you know what, I'm spiritual but not religious, or I just don't like the institutional church. Maybe you've heard those phrases, maybe you've said those phrases. Now, if you're listening to this and that is your thought, I completely understand where you're at, and in a lot of ways, I probably agree with you. But here's my response to it. One of the greatest advantages of being in a community of faith, having fellowship and having relationship with other people is because we can accomplish so much more when we work together. Now, the Connection Faith community is part of a larger community that encompasses 12.8 million people all around the globe. And it's part of the reason I love being a part of that connection too. We had this task a few years ago called Imagine No Malaria. Some of you may remember this initiative. We wanted to raise $2.8 million in this area to support a global cause of raising closer to $80 million to help eradicate Africa of malaria. From the time we started to the time we ended up raising over $80 million, and in Illinois, over $2 million, and we reduced the number of deaths in Africa from malaria in half. Quite literally saving hundreds of thousands of lives. Because when you get 12.8 million people working on the same problem, stuff changes. You can't do that alone. So being part of a community, we simply get more done when we are together. And that's only one example. This happens on smaller scales all around the world every day. Food drives that we put together. The trivia night that we had for Twigs a few months ago. In little ways, as a group, we can change the world around us. What we do literally changes lives because we get more done together. And that only happens when we are in fellowship with other people. It's important because we get more done together than we ever could alone. We have a good return for our labor. So that's your second question. I want you to talk in your groups about a time when you were part of a team. Or if you're watching this by yourself, pause the video and think back to a time where you were part of a team and you got done more than you ever could have gotten done by yourself. So we have a good return for our labor. We simply get more done when we're together. Now here's the third one. He says this in verse 10. If one falls down, the other can help him up. Now, initially I probably went where you did. That old commercial for Life Alert where the old lady's on the kitchen floor going, I've fallen and I can't get up. Have you seen those commercials lately? Like they amped up the dramatic effect, like she's now at the bottom of the stairs in a mangled mess covered in her laundry. But practically speaking, okay, if you have people around you and something goes wrong, they can physically help you. But I think this one goes so much deeper than that. I think it means this, that we support each other in times of any need. This is the receiving end of that last one. When we work together, we can get so much done for others. Well, when we are in community, we have people who can be there for us if we allow them to. This is another response I have to those people who don't like the institutional church or are spiritual but not religious. Their thought is, I can do my relationship with God on my own, but I say to that, what happens when you fail? What happens when you fall? What happens when life falls apart? What happens when you're in need and you can't do it on your own? What then? When you're in community and you have fellowship around you, when you develop those relationships with those people in the room with you, maybe even those that you're in a group with right now, sitting in this room today, when you fall, when you're in need, there is a community there to help you up. If you have community, you never have to suffer alone. We support each other in times of need. So if you are with a group now, I want you to answer this question. When was a time when people came together to support you? And maybe if you're a little bit vulnerable and you want to share, are you going through something now for which you need support? If you're watching this by yourself, think about those questions too, and maybe answer the question, what is preventing you from being part of a community that can support you in your time of need? If one falls down, the other can help him up means we support each other in times of need. Now the next verse, verse 11 says, if two lie down, they can keep warm. But this is a family show, so we're going to skip over that one and go to verse 12. The author says, one can be overpowered, but two can defend themselves. Now this is another one I want to take a little bit deeper. When this was written, you didn't want to travel roads alone. You wanted a companion or companions in case of marauders or robbers. Now in our context, we hopefully don't face those sorts of attack. At least we hope we don't. But each of us faces different types of attack throughout the course of a day, every day. We all face temptations to sin. We face struggles in our lives that are overwhelming us. And you know in your life what that is. Maybe it's an addiction, alcohol or drugs or prescriptions. Maybe it's lust and the negative ways that manifests itself. Maybe it's anger or the destruction that sort of anger leads to in relationships or your family. Maybe it's an unrelenting desire for success or what other people have, or maybe it's falling into those overwhelming negative thoughts about ourselves. The attack from those temptations are ever present in our lives. And as our scripture says, one can be overpowered. And so if you try to fight those things by yourself, you will fail. But in community, we hold each other accountable. And this is that next level, what defines true fellowship, true community. Getting into a group of Christians that you have enough of a relationship with to say, you know what, I'm struggling and I can't do this on my own. I want to be real and vulnerable, and I say I need you to hold me accountable because I can't do this by myself anymore. That's what that quote meant earlier from Timothy Keller. To be known and loved to me means being that vulnerable. And the beauty of it is this. One can be overpowered, but two can defend themselves. Alone, you'll be overcome by those things. But with others holding you accountable, supporting you, loving you, guiding you through those trials, they can help you defend against those things that are attacking you every day so that you will not be overcome. Now, if you've noticed, this is the depth. This is the core of that relationship. And every verse has gotten a little bit deeper. Two are better than one. Just knowing people is good for you. Working with others, getting more done together, you got to know what other people are doing and their skills in order to do those things. To be able to say, you know what, I need your help is another level. And then being able to admit those things that make us most vulnerable is the very core of relationship and being truly known. So each one of these verses dives a little bit deeper. So I want you to take a moment of reflection. This isn't something necessarily to discuss even in your group, or if you're by yourself, pause and just kind of meditate on this question. Maybe write something down in your journals about this, because this is real and authentic. You don't necessarily have to share this with those around you unless you really want to. Take a minute to think. What do you need to be accountable for? What is something that you no longer can do on your own? And then who can you reach out to hold you accountable to it? Take a minute and reflect on that. All right, so two can defend themselves means we hold each other accountable. Well, here's the last thing. We have four of these great reasons. Two are better than one. They have good return for their labor. If one falls, the other can help them up, and two can defend themselves. Four really great pragmatic reasons for being in relationship, to do fellowship. We're made for it. We get more done when we work together. We support each other in times of need, and we have people to hold us accountable against those destructive things in our life. There's one more verse, one more thing that the author says that sums it all up and holds it all together. And I love the way that the author ends this particular section. He says, a cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. I love that line, because if we try to exist on our own, we are easily broken. But if we exist in community, in fellowship with others, we can hold strong. But here's the thing. The author of Ecclesiastes, if you notice, to this point has been talking in twos. Two are better than one. If one falls, the other can help them up. Two can defend themselves. But now he throws in a little curveball. He says a cord of 3 strands. Well, who's the third strand? All right, pretty obvious. You don't have to shout it out. It just means that when we are in true, deep, authentic, meaningful Christian fellowship, God's presence is amplified. God enters into those relationships in a powerful way. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus says this very thing. He says, where 2 or more are gathered in my name, surely I am there with them. It doesn't mean that God isn't present when we're alone. It just means that when we are together with others in that sort of a fellowship in a Christian community, God's presence is amplified. And that is the 3-cord strand. You, others, and God. And that's the definition of community, of fellowship. It's a bond that cannot be quickly broken, because when God is at the center of our relationships, we are made strong. So here's where I want to end, because I know that what we've done to this point is a little bit heavy. So here's where I want you to go from here. The deepest relationships I have had with people are those that I can be real and vulnerable and authentic and struggle through things with, but also those I have the most fun with. And so if we aren't having fun, we ain't doing fellowship right. So the last order of business is this: have some fun. If you're in your groups, I've instructed your facilitators to take a little time now in the video and do something to just have a little bit of fun. If you're watching this by yourself, you got my permission to knock off early from work or take some time this week to get out, grab some friends, and just have some fun. Thanks for checking in for this week on fellowship. Next week, we'll get into public worship, what it means to gather together and worship as a community of faith. Quick announcement before you go. This week leads up to our next monthly worship gathering on the 24th at the Manny Jackson Center at 10 a.m. for public worship. We're doing it. We're talking about it. It's almost like we planned it that way. So put that on your calendar. Be there. And I want you to invite people. This is a great time to say, hey, we're doing this new thing. You ought to come check it out because it's going to be awesome. We're going to do it a little bit different, and I think it's going to be great. So thanks for checking in, and we'll see you next week.